Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. This is Lee Nagao from the Rx360 Secretariat. Welcome to this call, webinar from the Rx360 Supply Chain Security Illegal Diversion Working Group. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have a really good presentation coming up, a lot of really good work that's been done in this area by our group. I'm just going to go through a few logistics, and then I'm going to hand over to our speakers. Your speakers today are Tara Steketee, who is the chair of the Illegal Diversion Working Group. She is Associate Director of Product Integrity at Merck & Company. Also Tim Chesworth from AstraZeneca. He's Supply Chain Integrity Manager there, and a very active member of our Supply Chain Security Steering Committee, as well as many of our working groups within Rx360. Lou Kontnick at Amgen will also be presenting today. He's Director of Global Product Protection at Amgen, and also a very active member of our steering committee and communications groups and other groups within Rx360. So we welcome them as speakers. I just want to make a few notes. We will be recording this session as usual so that others who couldn't make it today can hear and see the presentation. This will be going up at a later time on the Rx360 website, as will these slides. Also, the papers that we'll be referring to are all on the Rx360 website right now. A few things about the webinar itself. Tara, if you could just go to the next slide. Here, I just want to inform everyone that on your window, you should see this dialog box and basically, or control panel. Right now, everybody's on mute because if we unmute people, we usually tend to get a lot of really noisy feedback, so we've muted everyone's lines. If you have a question you would like to raise, and I encourage everyone to raise your questions at the end of the presentation. We'll have a question and answer period. Simply click on the hand there that you can see, and the second arrow down. And then if you don't want to speak your question into the phone, you can simply write it in and I'll get it, and I'll just field those questions as well. Okay, so Tara, I'll hand things over to you as well as Tim and Lou, and I think we can get started.
Thanks, Lee. Before we go through the slides and overview that we've put together for you for our illegal diversion of pharmaceuticals white paper, we wanted to just take a minute to share with some of the folks on the call the mission that Rx360 has. This is why we are very happy members of Rx360. You can see that the mission overall is to protect patient safety, which is key, through sharing of information and process development related to the integrity of healthcare supply chain and the quality of materials within that supply chain. It's very important to us in all of the work that we do. And as you may be aware, the Illegal Diversion Group is one of many supply chain security working groups. And the objective of the supply chain security working groups is to develop and share best practices and information on key supply chain security processes and enhance collaboration among all stakeholders that sit within supply chain and supply chain security. We have various working groups, or Rx360 is kind enough to host various work streams. You can see some of the work streams at the top, with the central goal to, really that central goal is to develop processes and document those processes to mitigate and respond to the various counterfeit, theft, adulteration, fraud, etc. events that pharmaceutical and medical device manufacturers are faced with. And there's certainly advocacy and education and awareness, and there is, a lot of content provided by this particular association, which we certainly find helpful. This is a list of the white papers that have been produced to date through Rx360, through the supply chain security. steering committee and working groups. And so some of the most recent white papers that have been issued are the Product Security Incident Management white paper, for which there was a webinar about a few weeks ago, and our Legal Diversion of Pharmaceuticals Working Group white paper and this webinar, and there's also a very recent drug shortage white paper that was released. And again, all of the content listed here is available on the Rx360 website. So we'll move on to the purpose of today's webinar. Again, the purpose is to discuss the white paper that was produced by the Illegal Diversion of Pharmaceuticals Working Group. The key points that we hope that you'll take away from this particular webinar are the patient safety issues, certainly, that result from illegal diversion and those issues, as well as the vulnerabilities that cause pharmaceuticals to be illegally diverted. So we'll talk about what some of the causes are that lead to illegal diversion in general, and we'll illustrate those causes, those vulnerabilities through case studies that we've put together that, in different ways illustrate those key vulnerabilities. And we'll close the presentation with some best practice guidance based on the work that was, the product that was created by contributions from each of the members of our working group, based on best practices that have been developed at various companies for the various, as a means of thwarting the various vulnerabilities that we'll be discussing. So for the purposes of our paper, we've heard the term illegal diversion, and it's a pretty, that term can be certainly considered to be wide in scope. But for the purposes of this particular white paper, we've defined illegal diversion of pharmaceuticals exactly as you see here. But the key focus for our paper is product that is illegally diverted, redirected from one nation market to another nation market. So that's a key, I think, to focus on, because we have, there are multiple types of diversion. We see intra-market diversion, certainly, but we're focusing on product that's moving, that's being illegally diverted from one nation market to another. And with that, I will turn it over to Tim, who will take us through the impact from illegal diversion, as well as some of the vulnerabilities of illegal diversion.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tara. So we first of all consider the impact of illegal diversion. That people sometimes can think that moving product from one market to another is somewhat of a benign activity, but actually it can have a significant impact on patient safety because the material hasn't moved through a controlled supply chain. So therefore, its quality and authenticity cannot be guaranteed. And there are additional factors that need to be considered in terms of the product that's moving from one market to another. Is it actually approved in that particular market? Is it suitable for use in that market? Does the stability data support its use? Are there packaging concerns that might not be suitable in one market compared to another? So clearly this issue does present a lot of patient safety impact, and so I'm going to go on and talk in the next few slides to kind of explain how this phenomenon occurs and provide some detail on some case studies that you may or may not be aware of, and I'll talk about those. So let's go to the next slide, please, Tara. So the first thing to say is that the pharmaceutical supply chain is something that we all as patients trust in. We have to have a belief that the supply chain is secure and that the medicines that we're taking are going to treat the condition that we have. So therefore, any kind of penetration or compromise of that supply chain with things that should not be there is a significant risk to those patients' health. So what I've drawn out here on this slide is just to show the typical supply chain that you would see in a normal, sort of highly regulated market, a Western pharmaceutical market, moving through the manufacturer and ultimately to the patient. And I guess in terms of where the compromise can occur, it's mainly towards the right-hand side of that supply chain. So it's the distributors, wholesalers, pharmacies, where you tend to see issues with the illegal diversion. And this can happen in, as I said, highly regulated markets, but it can also happen in other markets. So some of the case studies I'll talk about, speak to that point. But it is worth really making clear that, the potential for harm here is in things where there, in markets where there's a lot of oversight, but the potential for harm is even greater in markets where there is less well-established oversight and control of those supply chains. So unscrupulous activity can go on for a long period of time and not be detected, continuing to put patients at risk. So if we go to the next slide, this diagram aims to show that effectively what we have is two types of supply chains that exist parallel to one another. A legitimate supply chain that you can see across the top, which is the one that I guess most of us will recognize, moving through manufacture, distribution via hospitals, pharmacies, and ultimately onward to patients. But there is also the illegitimate supply chain that exists that I've drawn out underneath. So the illegally diverted products exist within that illegitimate or illegal supply chain. But one can see that there are connection points, numerous connection points between the illegitimate and the legitimate supply chain. Via illegal distributors, the internet, to move products across that boundary, and ultimately, as you can see, it ends up in patients' hands. Unwitting patients who have that trust and belief in the supply chain can ultimately take patients that aren't going to treat their condition or may actually cause them harm. And the other point I wanted to raise on this slide is a very, very important one. Is towards the bottom left, you can see that the establishment of these connections between the illegitimate and the legitimate supply chain create lanes through which counterfeit product can flow. So there are examples whereby genuine, in inverted commas, product is moved through these illegal chains and illegal lanes, but then over time that product can be replaced or diluted with counterfeit. So it's a very important thing to bear in mind, is that illegal diversion is a very potent enabler of counterfeits, and there are examples that I'll share with you in a few minutes that really back that up. So just in summary, it's a complex picture. It's a complex network that crosses international borders and jurisdictions, but it's a very difficult thing to control, and counterfeits are a very big issue. So if we go to the next slide, we can now start to think about, well, what are the drivers for this? What is actually creating the circumstances in which illegal diversion can happen? And the main driver is around pricing differences between markets, which creates an arbitrage opportunity for people to create profit by moving products from one market to another. In some instances, you can have very significant differences between markets. It can be as much as 50–60% difference. For a variety of different reasons, as I alluded to earlier, different compositions, packaging, a whole range of different reasons for that to be the case. But we have to recognize that the main driver for this is the pricing differences. But there are a number of other related factors that enable it to happen, and they're listed out there. So you have to have people who are prepared to do this. So unscrupulous wholesalers, distributors. There has to be quite a lot of promotion and making people aware that these products are available. In some senses, it's about creating a demand, a pull for these products in certain markets. And there are other circumstances that can give rise to illegal diversion. So shortages, for example, can create a lack of product in a particular market or a particular group of markets that will then suck in diverted product from elsewhere. And clearly, product that is stolen, can disappear out of the supply chain only to appear somewhere else in another market. And other things to consider are government and charitable donation programs. There are a number of examples where, products are given away to certain parts of the world, and done so, in a true sort of philanthropic or altruistic sense. However, those products are then fall into the hands of people who are looking to make a profit out of them and move them into other markets where they can realize that profit. So in terms of the drivers for this, as I said, it's all about pricing differences and using that arbitrage to generate a profit. But there have to be these underpinning factors that allow the product to move and the illegal diversion to happen. So we go to the next slide, please, Tara. So now we're going to get into some of the case studies of where this problem has happened and some of the real serious consequences that have arisen. So this is a case back from last year in the United States, where, as I was talking about earlier, an illegal lane was established for diverting, in this case, an oncology product, Avastin, from certain parts of the world into the United States. So these healthcare providers were encouraged to buy this product because it was perceived as a low-cost alternative to the US version of Avastin. So they bought this product, and perhaps initially it was a genuine product, although it was not approved for use in the United States, and we must make that very clear. But over time, what happened is that supply chain was compromised with counterfeit, and these healthcare providers unwittingly bought counterfeit medicines into the United States and came very close to administering this kind of product to their patients. There's been a huge amount of investigation into this in the US. As it says there, a lot of warning letters issued by FDA, and now it's moving forward into prosecutions, and healthcare providers and distributors are actually now been found guilty of handling mislabeled and substandard counterfeit medicines. So very, very serious consequences in this particular example. But the key message here is that it's illegal lane that was initially established that has allowed counterfeit to flow into a particular market. So we go to the next slide, please, Tara. So this diagram is just to show how complex this flow is and how opaque the supply chain is. So starting off in the Middle East, moving through Europe, and then ultimately across into the US. So, as I said, it's an opaque supply chain where there is no visibility, therefore very, very limited control. And because of the large number of players in the supply chain, it makes it very difficult to put in place the right levels of oversight. And it makes product easier to hide, one can say, and because it's moving without proper levels of oversight. So please go to the next slide, please, Tara. So this is an example from the Philippines, so an emerging market. So we need to keep in our mind that illegal diversion is not something that happens exclusively to Western or so-called developed economies. It's a very big issue in emerging markets, particularly in Asia, Southeast Asia. So this example is, it was a joint investigation and a raid between a number of pharmaceutical companies and the Filipino authorities that led to a very significant raid a few years ago where a large amount of product was recovered. As you can see, it's a range of products from tablets to injectables, and this was a large-scale operation where they were bringing in products from a number of different countries, most notably India and Turkey. And I should mention that those markets are primarily the markets where we see product leaving and being diverted from because they are very low-priced markets. But this is, as I said, a very sophisticated operation. They had a parallel setup, effectively, where on the one hand they were operating, handling legitimate generic medicines, but they also had another operation that was dealing with these illegally diverted medicines and then introducing them via arrangements they had with distributors and pharmacies in the Philippines into this chain, and potentially putting patients at risk in so doing. So, this is a big issue, and the emerging markets very much have victims when it comes to illegal diversion. So we go to the next slide, please, Tara. So another aspect that needs to be highlighted is the use of the internet as an enabler of illegal diversion and then consequently an enabler of counterfeits. So this is a very widely publicized case to rxnorth.com. Where they were advertising, as it says in the slide, low-cost alternatives, low-cost products to US patients. So initially they were sourcing products from Canada and from elsewhere, but they then moved on to try and source products from further afield to create more profit for themselves. and in so doing, they introduced counterfeit into their supply chain, which ultimately found their way all the way back into patients in the US and elsewhere. But this case is sort of worthy of note because it was very much a complex supply chain that was deliberately designed so and moved the product through sort of legitimate, well, not legitimate countries, but kind of countries that are perceived to have a more of a regulatory framework for pharmaceuticals, so in this case the UK, that gave the illusion of these products being suitable and being appropriately controlled. So this case is, it's the buyer beware. Buying products online, people should very much recognize the risk that they are taking, and only buy medicines through authorized online pharmacies. So the person behind this particular case a few months ago was actually sentenced to 4 years in jail for his involvement in organisation of this particular arrangement. So the internet has many positives to it, but it also can be an enabler of criminal activity. So the next slide, please. So, okay, while the slide's coming up, it was just to mention the fact that theft can also be a driver of diversion of products. So clearly products are stolen. We have numerous incidents of pharmaceuticals being stolen all across the world. These products can be then resold within the same market, but often we see those products being moved into other markets. So just two examples here that have been contributed by people in the working group, where medicines are stolen in one country, moved to another. So there's Latin America, products being moved across hospitals and across borders. And then the example at the bottom is product leaving the US and ending up in Israel. So clearly the criminals in this case want to make sure that they can realize some kind of return or profit on what they have done. So if they can't get rid of the product in the market where they happen to be, they will look to try and export it to realize that revenue or that profit. So theft is very much a driver of diversion. Not the primary driver, but it is a significant driver. So that's the conclusion of my section on case studies and examples. So maybe pass it back to you, Tara, and you can start to talk about some of the mitigation actions that can be taken.
Sure, thanks, Tim. So we, at the close of our paper, really the final third of our paper was really focused on providing a compendium, a list of solutions and descriptions and action plans that can be carried out for each of those mitigation strategies for a legal diversion. Really, we were hoping to be able to provide a resource certainly to folks that are newer to focusing on illegal diversion of pharmaceuticals within manufacturing companies. And you can see here the list of different mitigation strategies that we have discussed specifically in the paper. We'll take you through a few of these sections as we move through these particular slides, focusing specifically on what can be done regarding supplier business systems and contracts, what can be done, what kind of work stream and checklist can be created for audits, how can we look more closely at reverse distribution and tighten up that particular area of the supply chain, and how data analysis and education can be used as well in terms of mitigating this overall threat. So we'll start with some of the proactive approaches in terms of supply chain security. The first thing, probably one of the most important, is understanding how each of our supply chain partners do business. It can be very different, and it can be certainly very different from country to country. Some of the key recommendations that are made, are that across the board, due diligence and interviews are conducted with all supply chain partners. An evaluation of the systems, processes, and training that are in place within those supplier companies, and what can be enacted within those companies and through the manufacturer in partnership to prevent illegal diversion. We also focused quite a bit on contracts, all of the obligations that would be important to codify in writing, by direct requirements that can allow, us to protect against illegal diversion, allow from that, product moving out of the standard supply chain so that partners are purchasing only from authorized sources. There should be storage and sourcing and dispensing components for each of those contracts, and then specific clauses within those contracts that actually specify prohibition of export of products to anyone, or onward sale to anyone that is likely to export that product, which can be key. And what was also certainly a major focus of the paper is when illegal or if when or if illegal diversion is detected, notification must be prompt and action must be taken as part of just a standard operating procedure. One of our other areas of focus was mitigation through audits. So we have the contract terms that are set up, and what those contract terms can also do is specify the right of the pharmaceutical manufacturer to audit the supply chain partner's operation. And you can see within this visual some of the following areas that should be audited, and our contract should allow for both for-cause audits that are announced and unannounced, as well as just a standard auditing procedure. And certainly those audits, one of the areas of focus certainly for those audits we would recommend would be the processing of returns. And we can look more closely at reverse distribution and some of the recommendations that were made by the various members of our working group and are included in that white paper. Product destruction processes. It's very, very important to have a specific procedure regarding product destruction. As a best practice recommendation, the paper notes that in as many cases as possible, the manufacturer should perform that destruction itself. If that's not possible, verification is a key component of any product destruction workflow. If an independent third party is verifying that product destruction, or if a particular market requires that destruction is carried out by government agencies, the manufacturer should look for that verification by an official government-issued product destruction order and confirmation. When possible, the added step of oversight of product destruction by a member of the manufacturing company or a third-party consultant hired by that manufacturing company is ideal. And that's a very important process to enact within any company. So as we move out of the supply chain a bit and we look a little bit at other areas that we can, other work streams that we can put into place within our own companies, data analysis was a key recommendation as a mitigation strategy for illegal diversion. We have transactional data available to us as manufacturers, and there is pattern analysis that is possible that can potentially identify fraudulent activity. So the identification of potential suspect accounts, perhaps through IMS DDD or MD-DDD data, is certainly a possibility. Or looking more closely at the buy and bill practices, showing higher billings. And certainly this would be something that would be important if you're trying to get a better understanding of some of the activities regarding providers and who may be sourcing products outside of the supply chain. And again, this all, again goes back to the overall patient safety component of illegal diversion. If these products are being sourced from outside of the regulated supply chain or the standard supply chain, there's an immediate patient safety risk. And I'll turn it over to Lou to take us through some of the other areas, mitigation strategies that can be employed regarding illegal diversion of pharmaceuticals. Lou, are you there?
Lou, are you there?
Lou, are you there?
It's possible he's muted his line, although he looks like he's unmuted right now. So he should be unmuted. No, we can't hear you, Lou. He's chatting to you now.
All right, so I will take us through the internal and external anti-diversion strategies that can be employed regarding education and communication. So this was another key component of our illegal diversion toolkit. Part of what's very, very important in order to have productive discussions and employ the mitigation strategies, some of which we've highlighted during this webinar, is internal communication within one's company. Building awareness around this particular area with the constituent groups that are going to be certainly, that will be impacted, but also that will be most helpful in terms of mitigating this overall issue. Establishing a process is always helpful, so establish the roles and responsibilities and the actual process around illegal diversion and supply chain security related to diversion of pharmaceuticals. So establishing that information and also messaging it is key. Some of the other areas that we've focused on were external communication. So in general, education of any channel partner to build awareness that this is an issue is going to be key. But establishing tools and processes for signal communication and communication out can also be key. And this could be, when we talk about signal communication, that can be, establishing a way to note that there is an actual issue within a particular company and establishing that process to communicate out external to the company as to what the issue is so that there is, follow-up. Also discussed a bit within the white paper the need for public education and information, circulation of that information regarding this particular issue. And one of the things that happened during the production of this this white paper and the discussions that we had as a working group was the creation of a new work stream around specific messaging. And so Rx360 currently has a working group initiative that we're calling Protect Your Patient, Know Your Supplier. And Lou Kotnick is leading this initiative. The objective is, in general, to discourage risky buying practices through education. And the mechanism for education is through, education of medical practices through professional organizations. So professional organizations, at this point, we've contacted 20 organizations, and you can see some of them listed here. The American Medical Association, the American Academy of Medical Administrators, the folks, those medical administrators that sit right next to the fax machine and can pick that fax blast up. Those folks, in addition to the providers, to the physicians are folks that we want to make sure we're educating. And the members of the group were the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, University of Texas School of Pharmacy, Amgen, Merck, Pfizer, Genentech, with the FDA as an observer of this group. We do have a message that's published and available on the website, so we encourage attendees certainly to take a look at that messaging as it begins to be circulated to the various healthcare professional organizations. And that message cascade is planned for completion and evaluation in June.
Hi, this is Lou. Can you hear me now?
We sure can. I've never heard you quiet.
Terrific. Yeah, I don't know what prevented me from having access, but thank you. I think you did a great job. And yeah, I'll just emphasize that the that communication is critical. I mean, with awareness comes the ability to detect the problem, and with proper escalation processes, there is the ability for the company, the organization, to take action against what it's detecting. And the Rx-360 initiative, Protect Your Patients, Know Your Supplier, seems to be getting a good deal of traction, which is terrific. It was really founded on the premise that there are some medical practices and medical practice administrators, et cetera, that may not really understand that when they're being approached by a representative from one of these diversion companies, and that diverter is telling them that, yes, this is all perfectly good and we're an American company and that makes everything legal, that really it's a pack of lies. And it is illegal to import product. It's fraud to bill the government and payment organizations. Medical malpractice does not cover those omissions, and you can be prosecuted or lose your license. So these are major issues of safety and legality, and I think that message is beginning to be carried out, which is terrific. We will do an evaluation of the effectiveness of that with these 20 organizations that we're working with in June, and we may well come to the realization that there are additional opportunities for engagement by Rx-360. So I think that kind of wraps up the additional elements that I wanted to add. I'll hand it back over to Tara. Tara, can you?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. I apologize. Tim, did you want to take us through our summary and conclusions?
That's fine. So sure, I'll try and sort of draw things together. So this is a final slide here, just to sort of draw out the main themes that we tried to get across both in the paper and in the webinar today. I guess one thing that I should stress is that the webinar is given a high-level overview of the paper. There's a lot of content in the paper, and I'll certainly encourage all of you to go to the Rx360 website, download the paper, and read it through for yourselves. There's a lot more information on the case studies that I talked about. But with that said, these main messages are that illegal diversion is very much a global problem, and it's one of these issues that is growing as a consequence of globalization. That as we move towards a much more interconnected world, the pharmaceutical industry is not immune from that, and this is one of the downsides that we have to deal with. And we almost must recognize that this diversion activity, is a patient safety issue, because as it says there, the quality and the authenticity of this product cannot be guaranteed. Therefore, as a patient, we cannot rely on that product. And worse than that, if we allow this to occur, these illegitimate channels can be established, and once those have been allowed to occur and to run, they can then be used by unscrupulous people and criminals to introduce counterfeits, which can cause very, very serious damage to patients. So that's another key message that we want to leave you with. And the final one is that we all have a stake in this. We're all players in the pharmaceutical supply chain to some degree and have particular roles, responsibilities, but we all have a key responsibility to work together to identify where this is going on and mitigate the weaknesses in our supply chain. And in so doing, we'll create a stronger and more robust supply chain that will ultimately deliver high quality product to patients all of the time. So thank you very much for your attention, and I guess I can turn it back to Lee now as the chair. And I believe we have had some questions through on the text, and I guess we can take questions on the phone as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tim and Tara and Lou. Great presentation. So I'm opening the floor now to questions, and I do have a few that were written in during the presentation, so I'll tackle those first. And as I mentioned, people can either raise their electronic hand to speak through the phone or send in your questions via the question box. So a couple of the questions have to do with where do we find documents and can I get these slides, etc. And yes, absolutely, these slides will be available right after this webinar. And you can also just email us anytime, the secretary, we can send them to you directly. As for all the papers and guidelines and things that were mentioned in this presentation, specifically someone was curious about the audit assessments of third-party providers. That tool and that paper, they're all on the Rx360 website. If you go to resources under the documents page, this has all the white papers produced by the Rx360 Supply Chain Security Working Groups, as well as the slides from their webinars and any tools that they've produced. These are all available on the web. Okay, so let me just go through some of these questions here. Pardon my clicking. I just have to click through these questions here. Okay, so one question has to do with online pharmacies. The question is, do regulatory agencies require online pharmacies to register as brick-and-mortar pharmacies? To register as brick-and-mortar pharmacies in the States, like they are in the States, at least.
So the question is whether or not online pharmacies must have a brick-and-mortar presence?
If they're required to register as brick-and-mortar pharmacies. Sorry, no. Are they required to register somewhere like brick-and-mortar pharmacies are required to register? I guess to register themselves as a pharmacy.
So we have, I don't think that there are any regulations necessarily through the FDA, but there is a mechanism through the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy where sites can register for review and approval to become a verified internet pharmacy as part of the VIPS program. And once, there are, gosh, I think right now there may be about 30 sites that are authorized VIPS, quote-unquote, pharmacies within the United States. Of the 30,000 or 40,000, I believe, legit script has identified, that are out there, but there are about 30 that are authorized, and that process for, authorization would be through the NABP, through their VIPS program.
This is Lou, and let me add what my understanding is on this, and that is that there's a jurisdictional question. So if I am going to open an internet pharmacy, the question is, where have I got my servers, where am I located, so on and so forth. I think as a practical matter, given that kind of jurisdictional difficulty, that is, the FDA doesn't have any jurisdiction directly over somebody who, say, is in Argentina and registered through a site in Mauritius. The idea of required registration becomes kind of an empty notion. And I think that that's why we're seeing the proliferation of these so-called internet pharmacies, I think there is an effort, and again, I think Tara probably can comment on it more fully, but there are efforts both through Interpol, through the FDA, through other cooperative organizations to go ahead and address the issue of this kind of Wild West situation of just internet, quote, internet pharmacies popping up here and there and everywhere. So I think the idea of registration, it's a great idea, but I just don't think it has any traction in most instances with particularly the diversion-oriented or the less reputable organizations. Thanks.
Sure, and I mean, just to follow up on that, U.S. federal law does not mandate registration, so again, there isn't that oversight. There are, important associations like ASOP that advocate for, such registration, but at this point, there are states that do require licensing of pharmacies. We have seen, the implementation of the Falsified Medicines Directive in the EU, which is, that will provide more oversight for online pharmacies that are operating, in the EU as well, if that's helpful.
Okay, so another set of questions. I'll just kind of bunch two together. Do we know where patients have been harmed by taking counterfeit drugs, and how much does this cost our industry annually?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that one. So in terms of patients being harmed by counterfeit drugs, I'm very sorry to say that, certainly we have examples where patients have taken counterfeit versions of AstraZeneca products, and those patients have not survived as a consequence of taking those medicines. So we have real evidence, and so we have two cases where, or numerous cases, but they're two categories. The one category is where we have these kind of toxic counterfeits, where there are things in there that are actually poisons that do kill patients. So a number of examples of those, tragically. And we also have examples where counterfeits that contain no active ingredient. So these materials or these products are used by patients believing that they're going to treat the condition. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen because there's no active ingredient. So the patients then go on to suffer complications, and ultimately, in a number of cases that I'm aware of, the patients haven't survived. So there is real human impact through the use of counterfeit drugs. In terms of the other part of the question around the financial impact, I guess for us as an industry, it's not really about the money, if you like. It's more about the patients and making sure that, that when a patient takes a medicine from a pharmaceutical company, a reputable company, that they can have confidence in that product, that it is going to treat their condition and it's not going to do them any harm. So again, I can't speak particularly for other organizations, but certainly from our point of view, the primary reason for us wanting to do more in this space is about protecting patients and making sure that our patients are protected. I don't know, Tara, do you want to say any more on that?
No, I mean, I think you stated it very well. I mean, that's the premise of our entire product integrity protection effort at Merck. I mean, it's patient safety focused. So that's the central concern.
Okay, thanks. Here's another question. Is a diversion product that is not in control or whereabouts unknown and not sure what conditions the product was subjected to? I guess the question is, would that be under the category of diversion?
Yeah, I think it's kind of it's part of the same thing, really, because I can think of examples where we have illegal diversion of cold chain products that that have to be maintained within a very strict temperature range, and I'm almost certain that in the act of diversion that's not happened. Therefore, the quality of that product when it arrives for use by the patient, it can't be guaranteed. So the kind of the act of the diversion is the thing that can adversely impact the quality of the product. So hopefully that's an answer to the question. It comes back to this central point of if you divert product out of the authorized supply chain, you cannot guarantee its quality and its authenticity.
This is Lou, and particularly in the context of cold chain product, we know from our own surreptitious test purchases where we have bought product from internet pharmacies or from trade boards that are advertising the availability of products, our products. We know that oftentimes those products arrive after extended transportation periods, days, weeks even, and sometimes there are efforts made by the diverters to put a cold pack in. Sometimes that's not even necessarily the case. So, and generally the material arrives tepid or warm. So the efficacy, both the nature of the product, could it be a Avastin type of situation where you actually are receiving counterfeit? That's always a question. But assuming that it's real product, there is the real question about the quality of the medicine when it arrives, the effectiveness of the medicine.
Okay, thanks, Lou. I'm going to unmute a line here. So Carla Stucker from BMS has a question that she'd like to pose. So I'm just going to unmute your line, Carla. Okay,
I'll give it a shot. My question has to do with the credibility of the AABP's accreditation for its pharmacies and broad accreditation, and us as an industry looking to that as providing credible sources that would help us in terms of preventing the legal diversion of products. My understanding is that there is no physical inspection towards those accreditations, and with that in mind, to what level of confidence should we really hold in such accreditations?
Lee, I don't know whether you heard the question. I don't think we on the panel could really hear the question.
I think your question is similar to the one that you also wrote in, so I'm going to read your question online as well. So I think it's about the accreditation firms. So the question is, my understanding is that VIPPs does not do a physical inspection of the business, so why as an industry would we put confidence in this accreditation? Same goes for VAWD.
I'm going to go ahead. This is Lou, and I'm glad to have somebody else pick it up. But Carla, I guess I'm not fully qualified to answer the question. But I would say that I do have a fair degree of knowledge about the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, and so while I don't understand fully the VIPS program, I am aware of the scrupulous nature and diligent work that the board does, or the National Association of Boards. So I take it as having value. I'm sorry, I can't give a more detailed and sort of experience-based answer.
Hi, Carla. This is Tara. I mean, in fact, VIPS does they will complete physical inspections for online pharmacies that are applying for certification. So it's my understanding that that is certainly part of their process. There are other accreditation, quote-unquote, associations or services out there. Some of them, one of them is called pharmacychecker.com, which, to my understanding, doesn't do any type of on-site check or anything like that for a physical location. So the standards of that kind of accreditation service, would be really even incomparable to the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, if that's helpful. So those associations or, accreditation processes do vary. The standard, the gold standard really for U.S. pharmacies, for online pharmacies, would be the VIPS program. And they do an inspection of the brick and mortar location.
Okay. Another question here has to do with let's see, this one refers to just generally the topic of online pharmacies could be and has been the topic of many papers in and of itself. But could you discuss how and why the Rx360 working group determined the focus of this paper, the target audience, and perhaps some considerations and issues that got left on the chopping block?
Sure, I can take that question, Lee. That's an excellent question, and I would love to respond to that for hours. But just being considerate of the time that we have left, when we began this working group, we really, the topic of illegal diversion, you can look at that in many ways. As we mentioned previously during the webinar, there's intramarket diversion that we didn't even, take a look at within this particular paper, because the reality was if we didn't refine our goals and our thesis for this particular effort, we could have written a book. So what we chose to do in order to look at this problem in a global fashion so that it would, we'd be able to provide a document that would touch the most people and we hope be of the most use and really look at this more holistically. We focused our particular discussion on, illegal diversion as it relates to products moving from one nation market to the next. But I mean, again, it's such a vast issue that we could have, there are many other areas that we could have discussed, and certainly there may be, who knows, I mean, there could be future work streams within Rx360 to explore some of those other areas within the topic of illegal diversion. Any other comments from Tim or from Lou on that topic selection?
Yeah. No, I think it was, as you were saying, the issue was about where to focus, because it could have been huge. The amount of content that we started off with, we really could have written a book on this subject. And I think there's material that we've got that we may well go back to and develop further. Some of the themes of intra-market diversion, I think, is something that might be worth looking at. I think more work perhaps on the sort of theft and link between theft and diversion might be something of worthy of more focus. But I think that Tara said it, that we had to decide on what we were going to focus on. We really wanted to emphasize this point that this issue is international and it's a global problem, that has many facets to it, and we tried to so perhaps we didn't go down into too much detail on each of the aspects, but we just wanted to really raise awareness around this problem and some of the issues that it presents and the multiple causes that it has.
And I agree with what's been said.
Okay, I have a couple more questions here. Just maybe we can get to these in time. I realize we're at the top of the hour, but perhaps we can get to these. So here's a question. It says, as a North American logistics company, how can we become better involved to help with the challenges faced and also create awareness to the issues?
This is Lou, and I'd like to respond and say that, yeah, we need the involvement in Rx-360, whether it is in this paper. I mean, this paper is finished, so, but whether it's in the supply chain security working groups. There are a few new working groups that have recently been kicked off, and I think, yes, we are very much interested, very much willing to involve other organizations in these activities. We need that diversity of perspective from the whole supply chain in order to really tighten this supply chain through our collaborative analysis and efforts. Lee, maybe you can give more specifics on how to get involved.
Oh, sure. I mean, any companies that are involved, whether you're a supplier, logistics service provider, et cetera, or a pharmaceutical or biotech firm, if you're interested in joining Rx360, you can contact us through the website or just contact me or anyone at the Secretariat directly, and we can send you information. There's a lot of, especially within the supply chain security activities of Rx360, there's a lot of opportunities to be involved in many of the working groups and efforts, initiatives that we're taking on. Okay, one other question. The Turkish government does not support legal remedies against illegal diversion. Besides education, what can we do in Turkey?
Yeah. Okay, I'll have to take that one. You're absolutely right. The exportation of pharmaceuticals from Turkey is not illegal, and the paperwork you need to get product out of the country is minimal. Customs will normally only require you to have an invoice, but that is something that needs to be addressed, and there needs to be more, I think, cooperation and interaction between the pharma industry, the Ministry of Health in Turkey, and the customs organisations, so they recognise, the issues, particularly these issues around counterfeits coming into the supply chain. And there is intelligence that leads us to believe that Turkey is involved in some of that. So that's one aspect to it. But I think on a practical note, one thing that can be done, and certainly we've tried to do this, is to put in place clauses within our contracts with our first-tier customers in Turkey that says that if we believe that, or we have intelligence evidence that they're involved in this kind of activity, exporting products, that we will terminate the relationship with them. So we recognize that it's not an illegal act that they're committing, it's not a criminal offense, but it will be breach of contract. And so that's the route that we've tried to take, and to try and get the message across to the people that we work with in Turkey that we only want to work with people who are working in the right way and share the same values that we do, and are not looking to export our products. So that's the kind of practical step that we've taken. I don't know, Tara or Lou, if you want to comment any further on that.
No, Tim, I think that's an excellent suggestion. And there is more information about, regarding that suggestion, in a general way. It's not specific to Turkey per se, but that information is included in the white paper.
Okay. Actually, there's one other question here. There are some questions, I think, about just specific questions on the wording within the slides, and I'm happy to sort of field those maybe after the call here. But there's another last question here about what is the current mechanism that prevents online pharmacies from becoming the main sources of pharmaceutical products, prescription products?
So what is the current mechanism that prevents online pharmacies from being the main
source of Rx products? Yeah.
Well, there isn't a centralized mechanism. There isn't a mechanism to prevent that. We think we have to, clearly distinguish between what we know and accept to be authorized online pharmacies like CVS.com and the rogue illegal online sellers, if you will, that operate these pharmacies that sell illegally diverted, counterfeit, unauthorized generic drugs, which are not approved for sale in the United States if we're looking at the U.S. But, when we look at this in a global way, they're really, aside, the Falsified Medicines Directive, there isn't really much, legislation out there to really curb that. What we can say in general is, there isn't that mechanism out there, but there are groups that will advocate and that do proactively advocate for such a mechanism. Again, we mentioned, I think I mentioned the Alliance for Safe Online Pharmacies, ASOP, and we also, we have other proactive groups like Legit Scripts, certainly the NADP, et cetera.
Yeah, but I think you're right, Tara. It's very much an emerging area that, as more and more business moves online, pharmacies are no exception. And I think as an industry, it's a big challenge for us is, we're not going to stop the move towards internet pharmacies, but how do we make it more controlled, to protect patients? And, the number of the initiatives that you mentioned, certainly, we're involved with as a company, trying to shape that agenda and make the internet safer for a safer place to buy pharmaceuticals.
Okay, I think that's it for most of the questions. As I mentioned, we actually can just we can collect a list of these questions that all came in. I think we didn't get to every single one of them. As I said, some of them have to do with the content wording in the slides. We'll get to those too afterwards. But if people have other questions they would like to pose to the group after this webinar, please feel free to send them in to us. We can send them to the speakers and the group and field those as well after this call. Any last words from Tara, Lou, or Tim to close us out?
I don't think so. Just to say thank you very much for your participation and your attention. And as Leah said, please send the questions in, and we'll do our best to get responses back to you. So thank you for that.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks for staying over slightly. As I mentioned, just keep a lookout on the Rx360 site for these materials and for the recording. And thanks for being on today, and we look forward to having you on some of our future webinars as well. Bye-bye.